Spoilers! You know, prequels usually suck. They are unnecessary, forced, uninteresting, and just not needed. They are telling us, hey, you know that thing that you really loved? Well, here's what happened before it. God, it's so lazy. Prequels are the bane of my existence, and they need to stop. We don't need every single detail of what happened before in a character's life. But Black Widow is a prequel that actually worked. It's officially on the short list of the good ones. So, let's get into the good and the bad of this movie and see where this ranks in the MCU. First, the good. The tone of this movie is fantastic. Even though I love them, a lot of the MCU movies have a few too many jokes, and it can feel forced sometimes. A scene can come to a complete stop just to try to get a laugh out of you, and it can feel unnatural. But this movie doesn't really do that very much. There are 2 or 3 times that the humor was cheesy, but overall, the humor came naturally and the film had a consistent tone. And that tone was pretty damn dark. I loved how it went to depths that we haven't really seen before in the MCU. The beginning montage of the little girls being kidnapped was very powerful, and a pretty clear commentary on human trafficking. And the whole movie addresses being controlled, losing your free will, regretting things in your past, making up for your past, forgiving people, and all of the themes are really good. It wasn't all implemented well, but the themes that they were going for were pretty deep. Natasha is dealing with the fact that she killed an innocent little girl, that she never really had a family, that she was conditioned to be a cold-blooded killer. It was a nice change of pace from the more comedic movies like Ant-Man and the Wasp, Guardians of the Galaxy, Thor Ragnarok, and Spider-Man Far From Home. Most of the characters were good as well. This might be Scarlett Johansson's best performance as Natasha, and she really kills it in this movie. I wouldn't say that this isn't her movie like some people are saying, but it does seem like she's just kind of along for the ride in a lot of the scenes. So I do think that her character could have had 1 or 2 more powerful moments. But overall, she's great. Yelena was pretty good. I'm not a huge fan of her, but she was serviceable. She made me chuckle a couple of times, and she had a few really nice emotional moments. Melina was probably the most forgettable of the 4 main characters, but she's not bad. She did choke a pig, so there's that. David Harbour as Red Guardian was maybe my favorite part of this movie. He looked kind of cheesy in the trailers, and I was worried about him, but I loved almost every scene he was in. He was a total jackass and a terrible father, but just like Drax, his reactions to situations were gold, and he was the only character to make me actually laugh out loud. His powers were very disappointing, but as a character, he was the most entertaining part of this movie. Probably the most classical type of MCU character, but I enjoyed him quite a bit. The whole dinner table scene where Natasha was calling them out for what they did was probably the best scene in the movie, and it really worked when all 4 of them were together. And then Dreykov was pretty good. He wasn't in it very long, so he didn't have the impact that he could have, but for what he was, he served his role, and you actually hate this slimy son of a bitch. Also, this movie was pretty brutal. You see some blood when people get stabbed. A woman falls to her death and her leg is bent backwards. A guy's arm gets broken and flops around like jello. And the action overall is pretty hard hitting. This movie also has a pace that flows nicely for the most part. The opening scene sets up a conflict and mystery with his family, and the movie just keeps that momentum going all the way through. Except for a few slower scenes. But those scenes build character, and they don't really bog down the flow of the story. I like the score, I like the cinematography, I like the acting, I like some of the action, and I liked the character dynamics for the most part. There are a lot of things to like about this movie, but there are a few things that hold this movie back from being truly great, from being a truly excellent film. The bad. Oh boy, let's get this out of the way. The biggest flaw of the movie for me. Taskmaster was shit. An absolutely disappointing, underwhelming, underdeveloped, boring, trash villain. Having the ability to copy anyone's fighting style is such a cool concept, and they could do so much with that. But they don't here. Taskmaster is a literal plot device used to move Natasha from one scene to the next. His awesome power of copying people's fighting styles from the comics was a gimmick in this movie. She throws her shield-like cap, but she always misses. She uses a bow and arrow like Hawkeye one time, then does nothing else in that chase scene. Then she pulls out claws like Black Panther, but she doesn't ever use them to cut anything. There was just an illusion of her having those powers, and she fought like an average action movie bad guy. She wasn't unique, she wasn't threatening, and she was a non-character for the whole movie. It's revealed that she's the main villain's daughter that Natasha thought she killed, and we're supposed to feel bad for her, but we don't because we have no idea who she is. She's a faceless killing machine who never talks, and it wasn't even Natasha's fault that she became Taskmaster. Her dad would have turned her into a mind-controlled Black Widow just like the other girls, whether she was blown up or not. I don't feel for her any more than I do the other brainwashed women. All of the so-called emotion from her character was hollow, empty, and didn't mean anything to the story. The apex of her character arc was her wailing on the ground, breathing heavy, then we never see her again. She becomes good, says one line while she's laying on the ground, it cuts away, and that's it for her. That's her ending. Plus, her awesome abilities of copying fighting styles was just plugged into the back of her helmet and downloaded into her. She didn't even earn those skills. She was just a voiceless, characterless, generic piece of garbage, and she was one of the most disappointing villains in all of the MCU. And that's not even mentioning the fact that she looks like somebody who plays competitive paintball on the weekends. Good lord! She was just a Winter Soldier ripoff, and it really didn't work for me. I know it's only one character, but when the whole story hinges on the implementation of this villain, it's a huge flaw in the movie. The action was also very disappointing overall. The actual choreography of what the characters were doing was good, but the camera was pulled in so close in most scenes that it was hard to tell what was happening. Other than the fight between Natasha and Yelena, not one fight felt original or fresh. It was your standard punching and kicking. Not really bad, but not great. In an action movie, I would like to see some great action. And this movie got so wacky towards the end that it really felt like a classic James Bond movie. Maybe you will love that, but I didn't. The third act had an evil villain in a floating sky fortress who controlled Natasha by having her smell his pheromones, and it just became complete cheese at a point. She banged her head against a table and severed a nerve so that she couldn't smell him anymore, and I was just rolling my eyes. Then she started skydiving and fighting Taskmaster in the air as they fell, and it went from being a kind of grounded story about family to a full-on crazy MCU final fight, and it felt a bit disjointed. Then the ending with her family didn't really have the impact that they wanted it to. They all kind of nod at each other and smile, and then they leave. They built it up to be this emotional and cathartic moment, but I didn't really care. And while Red Guardian was entertaining to watch, They completely wasted his potential. He is a big, dirty, tatted up version of Captain America, and he doesn't do anything with his powers. They kept cutting away from his fight with Taskmaster, and we don't see him fight anybody else the whole film. I wanted to see this superpowered guy wreck some people, but sadly, he doesn't. He just keeps talking about his glory days, but we don't see any of it. That's also a big problem with this movie. There's a lot of telling and not showing. They tell us about Red Guardian being a badass, but we don't see it. They tell us about Yelena getting experimented on and abused, but we don't see any of her trauma. They tell us about her adventures with Hawkeye in Budapest, but we don't see any of it. They tell us about Melina going through the Red Room 4 times, but we don't see it. They keep telling us about them being a family, but we only see it for a couple of minutes. They tell us that Taskmaster is awesome, but we don't see it. It's a lot of implied emotion and stakes, and I just think it could have been done better. And speaking of stakes, that's also an issue for me. Yes, we all knew that Captain America and Iron Man wouldn't die in their solo movies, but there was always that small possibility in the back of our heads that anything could happen. We had no idea where the story was going, but in this movie, we know where Black Widow's story goes. We know that she doesn't die, so the threats didn't really feel real. Taskmaster is automatically less threatening when we know for a fact that Natasha isn't going to die or get seriously injured. So that hindered some of the action scenes and drama for me as well. And overall, the fact that this movie is so late, she's already dead, they moved the release date 2 or 3 times, it probably did have an effect on how much I enjoyed it. But even with all of its many flaws, it's nowhere near bad, and I actually think it's a good movie. I don't know if I personally enjoyed it a ton, but objectively as a film, this is a top 10 MCU movie. It had a lot of themes that I loved, and there was so much potential here for a fantastic movie, but it doesn't quite reach those heights. It's a good movie, and if you're a fan of the MCU or spy thrillers, I definitely recommend that you check it out. Black Widow gets 7 out of 10 pickles from me. Alright guys, there you go. It was really nice to see another MCU movie again, and I'm just glad that it wasn't terrible. What did you guys think of Black Widow? Let me know in the comments and we can talk about it. No matter if you loved it or if you hated it. I want to discuss it with you and hear your opinion. Drop me a like if you enjoyed this video, and maybe subscribe to my channel if you enjoy my content. And of course, drop a dislike if you hated this video, and if you hate everything about me. Thank you so much for watching to this point. I really appreciate it. And until we meet again, peace out.